Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. So where are the Conservatives going to go is a question that a lot of people are asking. And I had a gentleman on about 2 weeks ago, publisher and editor of Ottawa Life, Dan Donovan, who's written a cover story about the existential crisis within the Conservative Party. And then last week, I interviewed Rick Peterson, chairman of Peterson Investment Bank, Peterson Capital, who has organized an organization called Center Ice Conservatives, something to do with hockey and the parallels of being in the center of the ice, I presume. And they got a conference coming up this week to try to determine where conservatives should be on the political spectrum. And so I thought I'd invite, actually Rick suggested I invite two other gentlemen to join us tonight. The first one is Dominic Carty. He is a member of the legislature, the Legislative Assembly in New Brunswick. He from Fredericton, West Hanwell, and he's also the Minister of Education. So I presume we could have lots of interesting conversations about provincial politics and Atlantic Canada and education and stuff like that. But tonight we're going to focus primarily on the Conservative Party. And second of all, Brian Bullock, who is, in addition to being another one of the directors of the Conservatives, Center Ice Conservatives, is chairman of Maxis, which is a staffing and consulting company, primarily in recruiting. And again, we could probably have lots of interesting conversations about recession and staffing and unemployment, employment, and we might, but we're going to stick to Center Ice Conservatives. So Dominic, maybe I could start with you, sir. You're an existing MLA. You obviously have an opinion about where the Conservative Party has been and should be. Why would you join an organization like Center Ice Conservatives?
Because I think it's desperately needed that we're seeing the center ground in Canadian politics being increasingly abandoned by all of the parties, all of the major parties. And I think that whenever that happens, whenever you have people leaving that center ground where people can meet and talk across a divide, operating, to continue the hockey analogy, within an agreed upon set of rules, and you have folks floating off to the extremes where they make up their own rules, we are putting at risk the viability of our country. And we're seeing this with populist movements wreaking havoc across the Western world. And I think it's a real present danger to our democracy. And we have got to get the center back under control. And that means, it doesn't mean just saying we want the status quo. We're not looking to go back to the 80s here. We've got to recognize that folks on the left and the right who've been raising concerns and complaints about the way that our country is currently being run, some of those complaints are completely valid. It's just that the solutions being presented by the extreme left and the extreme right are completely invalid. They've been proven wrong over and over and over again over the last 100 or so years. And what we've got to do is show what works and work to make the things that don't work well right now work to make them better. So Center Ice Conservatives is about trying to make sure that we've got an option on the center right in Canadian politics with the Conservative Party that can actually articulate a new vision for what Canada should look like. No one's here arguing that everything should be run by the government or that nothing should be run by the government, which is what the folks in the extremes would like to have you believe. We're here to say that, yes, we've got work to do, but we have an incredible country. We're proud of our country, unlike those extremists who spend their time talking about how terrible Canada is. They almost sound identical, despite the fact they claim they're opposites. Talk about how this great country can be made even better. And that's what we're all about.
Sir, do you think the Conservative Party in its current leadership convention and campaign is at risk of becoming ultra-right then?
Well, I think there is always a risk. We see people who have cozied up to folks who went to Ottawa earlier this year with a manifesto calling for the illegal overthrow of our government. You can say that lots of those folks didn't know that's what they were doing, but that is what they were there doing. And just like we've seen in the States with the folks around the January 6th insurrection, lots of them didn't necessarily know what they were doing either. That is no excuse for a federal party. We have got to make sure that we clearly articulate what the rules of the game of politics are, because if we start to allow things to devolve to street protests, occupations, blockades, and I say that equally for blockades of roads, efforts to stop pipelines illegally. We have got to become a country again where the rule of law is respected, where we can have our debates and disagreements and differences, but have them played out within the rules that we have all worked so hard over hundreds of years, and so many people have died trying to build the system that we have. It would be a disgrace and a dishonor to their memories if we didn't do our best to try and reform and build on it, rather than just saying, as the ultra-leftists and ultra-rightists do, that we should just strip it all down, tear it all down, and somehow start again. This is an incredibly complicated, fragile, and delicate country that we have. unlike anything the world has ever seen. The same applies to a small number of other democracies. The idea that you can just strip this down and rebuild it again based on lines about either equity on the hard left or freedom on the hard right would undermine efforts to build genuine equity and to fight for genuine freedoms, which we have in spades in this country, unlike nearly any other country on the face of this planet in the history of this planet.
Brian Bullock, sir, why would you join an organization like Center-Ice Conservatives? I understand that you're in Ottawa, so you were aware those occupiers slash protesters that came back in February. What do you think? Is Dominic right that we've got people that are yelling freedom on the right and equality on the left, and they're the extremists?
Well, I think Dominic has a very passionate argument to be made, and of course, he's identified the number one issue that's been central to this country since its formation, and that's national unity. And so there's no question that the center, the political center, is where the solutions are found. There's always been polarizing voices in the country since its inception over 150 years ago. But I would like to say that in recent history, the fact that we have these vehicles of technology that allow the elements on each extreme or the polarization to be perhaps overheard is a reality and a fact that we have to work with, and we have to work to counter. And the reason why I joined the CI, the Center-Ice Conservatives, the CIC, is because I believe strongly that by holding the center or giving advocacy to the center, it also creates bridges for which both sides that are polarized, the extremists on each end, can come together and hopefully have common cause and common agreement on common policies.
We're going to take a break for some messages, and I'm going to come back after a 2-minute break and ask Dominic Carty and Brian Bullock about some recent reports that have suggested that the front runner in this leadership debate, leadership convention, has already won. That he's going to take the Conservative Party to the ultra right, and Aaron O'Toole, wasn't he the guy that did exactly what these gentlemen are suggesting? And he got kicked out within a few months of a losing election campaign. Stay with us. I think it's going to be a fun conversation tonight. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're talking tonight about the future of the Conservative Party of Canada. And frankly, we're talking about probably the future of politics in Canada, because my guests are with an organization called Center-Ice Conservatives. And they are, I think, arguing that the vast majority of us in Canada are in the center of the political spectrum. Dominic Carty, who is an MLA from New Brunswick, he's also the Minister of Education, has, I think, argued that I presume the Liberal Party and the NDP party have moved to the left, and the Conservative Party have moved to the right, and that he's talking about people that yell freedom and people that yell equality about being the extremes, and that what we need to do is figure out where the middle is. Brian Bullock, who is chairman of Maxis, which is a staffing and consulting recruiting company out of Ottawa, I think has argued that the history of Canada has been that the center has been, the unity has been the success that we have derived. But gentlemen, maybe I could ask you, this past weekend, and you probably read some of the same press that I read, there was a big article, I think it was in the National Post, that said Pierre Poilievre has already won. The only question is whether he's going to win on the first ballot or the second ballot, and that it's going to become the party of Pierre Poilievre. It's not going to be the Conservative Party anymore. It's going to be a personal, populist controlled party, and then one gentleman wrote a editorial column that suggested that he was the savior of Canada, and another column suggested he was evil and was so right wing it was scary. So obviously people are chatting about him. There was a poll that came out about 2 weeks ago that suggested that Jean Charest would win against the Liberal Party across Canada, but he would lose the leadership of the Conservative Party. That Pierre Poilievre would win the Conservative leadership, but he would lose an election against the Liberals. So it seems to me, and I think it seems to a lot of people, that Pierre Poilievre is playing right wing. and he doesn't have a center. And Jean Charest is maybe playing center, but Pierre Poilievre keeps on saying he's playing left wing, and because he's playing left wing, he can't be part of his team anymore. So tell me, Dominic, maybe start with you. What's going on in the Conservative Party today?
I think what we have right now is a question you're asking before the break about what's happening with the party and with the leadership race. And isn't this what Aaron O'Toole did, that he campaigned on the right and then tried to lead from the center and then got turfed? I think the problem is that there has been a level of shame about people identifying themselves as centrists. We've allowed it to become a dirty word. We've allowed politics in Canada to become increasingly defined by being on the extremes, the same as we've seen in the US, across Europe, all sorts of other places around the world. And that is what we're here to try and see if we can fix. To say that, look, there is nothing shameful about being on the center. You do not get more pure or more correct. You don't have better ideas if you slide off towards the extremes and the margins. In fact, you become further and further away from nearly all the ideas by definition. So the place where the exciting work of politics in a democracy is going to happen is always going to be around the center. And so in the Conservative Party right now, one of the things Senator Rice has been really clear about is that we're not endorsing anyone or going after anyone, even though lots of the members of the advisory board and the other folks involved have certainly made their own personal endorsements. But what we're here to say is that we have got to bring the energy back to the center in politics, that the center has to be the place of radical solutions based on our history and based on our values. We're supposed to be conservatives. And that means building on what we have, not just throwing everything out because we've decided we don't like it this week. And what we have is an astonishing achievement in a country that is just about unequaled in the history of the planet as being a fantastic place to live. And yes, we've got all kinds of problems and flaws, and our country has committed sins, but we're equally not going to get anywhere if we spend our time constantly apologizing for things rather than fixing things. So my hope is that we can have a Conservative Party that's forward-looking, based on the best of our traditions and values, and that we can start to articulate how we're going to fix the institutions the Canadians say they want fixed. That too many people in Ottawa, as speaking as a place where the Parliament's housed, over the last number of years, have increasingly become disconnected. And there's that feeling of a disconnection from elites, that people in politics are not listening to regular Canadians, and to dismiss their concerns. Lots of the concerns being identified by folks on the left and the right have got validity. And we've got to talk about those, but we've got to come up with solutions that are actually going to work, not talking about Bitcoin or whatever other foolishness is making headlines today. So that's my hope for the Conservative Party, is that we can become a serious party of ideas, but also exciting. Not some stuffy group of elitists far away from everyone, but saying that we're a party that actually represents the organic traditions of Canada, people living and working in communities, being part of church organizations, community groups, working at the local level to try and make life better. That's what we've got to reconnect again, which, as Brian was saying, is increasingly difficult when you've got social media, which allows for all kinds of extremist messages to be amplified, and people start abandoning those common spaces, those civic spaces, and they start to gather more and more around crazy ideas they find online. And we end up by going down rabbit holes that ignore science, ignore evidence, ignore all the things that made this country great.
Okay, I understand, sir, but seriously, isn't that exactly what Aaron O'Toole told the Conservative Party needed to do? And it didn't work, and he got turfed. And frankly, isn't that what the Progressive Conservative Party of, when was it, 15 years ago, represented? And it didn't work. And the Alliance and the Reform created a separate right-wing party, and when they merged, they created a Conservative Party that moved what was the Progressive Conservative Party, the Reform and the Alliance, to the right, because the Progressive Conservative Party that was in the middle didn't work.
Well, I think that's because the middle has become a place that was seen as being wishy-washy, vapid, and empty of ideas. And that's normal when you got a country that's as lucky as ours has been to have politics that's focused on the center, because that's the place where the fights happen and the good and the bad of politics.
We're dealing at
talk about the bad.
Are we recording?
I could hear someone speaking over me there. I'm not sure if there was a...
Yeah, we're recording. Whoever's asking that question. Brian Bullock.
Yeah, I was asking if we were recording because we seem to have a break. And we were spotty there.
Oh, we're still recording, sir.
Okay.
Maybe I could turn to you, sir.
If I could just finish answering that question, I want to hit on the O'Toole thing, if you don't mind, just because you gave me a pitch there, and I just want to make sure I hit it back.
Go for it.
Okay.
Aaron O'Toole campaigned hard on the right and then tried to lead the party from the center. We're saying, let's be honest about what we're doing. We do not believe the extremes are appealing. We don't believe the extremes are going to be what takes us to power or gives us the ability to change the country. And we got to be honest about that. And I think that O'Toole's experience shows why it's really important to be consistent. And the old Conservative Party, the Progressive Conservative Party you're talking about, one of the reasons it foundered was because it was seen as being disconnected. I remember the Mulroney years. So the goal is to be honest, open, and proud about being centrists, to be really clear that we reject the extremes, and to talk about ideas, put them on the table, and put those ideas up against those of the extremists, because our ideas are the ones that built this country and built the Western democracies that have given us, again, something that's never been seen in the history of this planet. The world's been full of extremists and demagogues trying to drive people off to the political extremes for all of human history, and their record is of misery and poverty and failure. Western liberal democracy gives us a pathway to success that no one else has been able to equal, and that's why it's replicated around the world. And it would be a tragedy for all those new Canadians coming to this country, looking for opportunities based on this model that we've built, however imperfect it is and how we try and build it. A tragedy if we ditched it just at the point when all those folks were still coming here looking for a way of life that it's only being allowed to exist because of these institutions and structures that have been built up with much pain and sacrifice over time. We got to continue to improve them because the world continues to roll on. I'm sorry for talking so much about this, but I'm passionate about this. We've got 5 or 10 years to save our country here, or we're going to fall down into the trap that we see to our neighbors in the South and other places, and we cannot let that happen.
No, I don't mind you talking at all and describing what you've described, because I am a social progressive fiscal conservative, and I think a lot of Canadians are in the center and are socially progressive and fiscally conservative. That said, Brian Bullock, I understand that you're actually supporting Pierre Poilievre, and what Dominic Carty has said is that we can't be talking about Bitcoin. Pierre Poilievre was talking about Bitcoin being able to be a great hedge against inflation. He has been attracting a lot of people. Actually, I think he was competing with Dr. Leslie Ann Lewis about who was the best supporter of the truck convoy. Isn't he actually doing exactly what Dominic Carty is suggesting is a mistake, which is he's campaigning from the far right? He's attracting people that would have typically supported Maxime Bernier in the PCP.
Well, I think Dominic is not only passionate, but extremely articulate. He presented his points very well, and in fact, I agree with them all. I think what we're witnessing, in my view, is, and you are correct, full disclosure, I am supporting Pierre Poilievre. And in this interview, what I'd like to describe, though, is the CIC and speak to that. I feel that because of the current incumbent government moving so far to the left and and adapting different policies, which are very much focused on, for example, identity politics, that even those people that believe they are in the center can sometimes be portrayed as extremists. Ideas such as equality or merit or Western democracy. These are all seen now as potentially issues or principles that are no longer acceptable, and in some conversations as extreme. I find that when I look at the situation and the public discourse that's occurring right now, when you look at the truckers' convoy, or even look at the number of people that have applied for membership in the Conservative Party as a result of this leadership, the numbers are out. They're astounding. Like over 600,000 memberships. The convoy, which I did not support, but when you look at it on its merits, it picked up more than $9 million twice in a row on a GoFundMe page, and then on another type of GoFundMe page. These are just in itself, these are extraordinary events that demonstrate that there's a huge sense of disenfranchisement that exists in this country right now, today, like a deep, deep current. And so to get back to the CIC, I think the purpose of the centralized conservatives is to demonstrate that, there are centralist positions that are grounded in Western liberal democracy and Western liberal civilization, and in the way parliamentary democracy works, where we should be able to have a centrist position that speaks to our culture and speaks to the beliefs and values that Canadians have stood for hundreds of years, and be able to build on that and not go to one extreme or, frankly, the other. We talked about, campaigning in this case from the right and then trying to move in the center when it's time to govern or go up for election. I think that's a tactic or a strategy that's been adopted by many leaders in the past. Mr. Nairn O'Toole, he wasn't the first to adopt that tactic, and I don't think he'll be the last. So it doesn't surprise me that some leaders are attempting to do that. And in terms of communication, there's no question that some leadership candidates are extremely effective at communicating, either using modern technology and knowing when to, go for that clickbait, and others who are less powerful or less capable at using it. So that's without naming names. But I think that what you'll find is as this leadership progresses, the tone, I'm hopeful, will become much more centric, and the outcome will be a series of policies that are centrist in nature. And yes, they do have some clickbait appeal to them, but ultimately it'll appeal to the vast majority of Canadians who feel they're not being represented right now and are losing faith in our institutions.
Sir, maybe I could try to probe you on a couple of the comments that you made.
Sure.
You talked about how people were appealing through social media and had the communication skills, and that the convoy had been so successful in raising money, and based on polls, got 15% of the support of Canadians. So it wasn't nothing. It wasn't majority, but it was 15%. So it's a significant minority. But isn't that exactly what Dominic was talking about? The populists and demagogues that have been unsuccessful and have been destroying Western civilization. Isn't that actually playing into the risk of being, I hate to use the example, but Trump-like in Canada, and appealing to those disgruntled, disenfranchised, grievance-oriented people that are going to be those loud voices. And you say that you can campaign in a leadership from the right and then pivot to the center. Rick Peterson last week said that Aaron O'Toole's demise was proof that you couldn't do that, because the biggest question was people didn't know who he was. You gotta be consistent. You gotta have a policy. You gotta have principles. You gotta stand for something, and people gotta understand you stand for something. And so therefore, if somebody campaigns from the center, they got to stay in the center. If they campaign from the right, they got to stay in the right, because that's what Canadians understand who they are. So aren't you at risk of doing exactly what Dominic is worried that you're going to do, move dramatically to the right and appeal to populist people, to a populist attitude, to using these, we've talked about Bitcoin as a hedge against inflation, talking about firing the Bank of Governor because he can't control inflation. There's been a whole bunch of very populist oriented sloganeerings that have come out of one of the candidates for the leadership, hasn't there?
Well, I think you're right. There has been from all candidates and from all leadership candidates, because some get more attention than others. There have been, statements that have been made to the effect that you brought forward. But I think that what the intent here to do is to say we're a big tent party, and there are groups that are represented that we want to try to bring into that big tent party. So I view it from the idea of trying to enlarge in the tent. That's always been my view. And I think that some leadership candidates each pull at their own, if you will, their own base or their own group of supporters that are stronger than others. And this is one of the cases.
Fascinating conversation. We're going to take a break for 2 minutes and then come back in 2 minutes with Dominic Carty, an MLA from New Brunswick, and Brian Bullock, a business person from Ottawa, both members of a new organization that just got launched 2 weeks ago called Center Ice Conservatives. They've got a convention coming up this week in Edmonton where they're going to try to put forward a bunch of policies that suggest that there is an opening in the center and that the Conservative Party should fill it. At the same time, as many people fear that the Conservative Party and the current frontrunner in their campaign is moving the party to the right. And the Ottawa Life magazine has a cover story about the existential crisis within the Conservative Party. I don't know. It sounds interesting. And I got to tell you one more thing. I interviewed another guy just a little while ago. I think it was called Clean Growth Conservatives, which was all about making sure that the Conservative Party had a reasonable climate change strategy. And his argument was that the Conservative Party historically has had an unreasonable climate change strategy, carbon tax or whatever strategy, and that you had to be sort of up to date on that too. Fascinating. It maybe is a really interesting discussion the Conservative Party is going through today. Stay with us, everybody. We'll be back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga Night 60. We're talking about the future of the Conservative Party and where it's going to be on the political spectrum tonight. Some people think that Pierre Poilievre, who is I think everyone accepts the front runner in the Conservative leadership campaign, is going to take the party to the right. Some people think to the extreme right. Other people just think, appropriately to the right. And other people think that that's a mistake, and that the Conservative Party, particularly given that some people would argue that the Justin Trudeau Liberals and the NDP, particularly with their current accord, whatever you want to call it, coalition, have taken the Liberal Party to the left. And so therefore there's this gaping hole in the middle of the political spectrum. Brian, maybe I could go to you. You're in Ontario, you're in Ottawa. Doug Ford, a lot of people thought was going to be very populist and was going to go to the right. And maybe in the first year of his government, he did. And Justin Trudeau in that election in 2019, frankly, ran against Doug Ford and won, partially because of that. And Doug Ford then, maybe because of what happened, maybe because of the pandemic, who knows what, really sort of pivoted to the center and became a very reasonable, a lot of people thought, centrist. And then just last month won a resounding majority. One of the candidates in the current federal Conservative Party leadership, Roman Baber, got kicked out of his caucus because of what he felt were inappropriately stringent vaccine mandates and rules. Doesn't Doug Ford's success prove that the Progressive Conservative Party of old, the centrist party that Dominic Carty describes, is actually the one that could be more successful? And frankly, it's the one of Brian Mulroney or Peter Lougheed or Bill Davis. And it's not the one of Stephen Harper or where Pierre Poilievre might take the party.
I think that individuals are important, but ultimately the party has an inertia, momentum, and a sense of value of its own. And it's true that once you're in government, you have to be responsible and responsive, not only to the party, but also to the electorate and to every member of your constituency. In this case, Doug Ford in the province of Ontario.
Brian, I'm interrupt. I apologize.
I recall
we're losing
the
connection.
Ford
we're losing connection with you, Brian. Dominic Carty, I wonder if I could ask you, one of the issues in the last two elections, maybe frankly 3 elections, is that the Conservative Party hasn't been able to win Atlantic Canada and suburban Toronto, Vancouver, etc. And I'm familiar, obviously, with suburban Toronto, and there it was that Andrew Scheer, Aaron O'Toole, social progressive issues, maybe even Stephen Harper, they just didn't resonate with the 905, or at least a lot of the 905 around Toronto, potentially Ottawa, potentially Montreal, potentially Vancouver. Tell me what the challenge for the Conservative Party is in Atlantic Canada right now, sir.
Well, I think it's connecting to the values that Atlantic Canadians have, and just like the folks in the 905 and the other urban belts across the country as well, and a lot of the rural areas too, that we don't want to be talking about whether or not women should have the right to be able to have control over their own bodies, make reproductive choices. We don't want to be talking about gay rights. We talk about being a party of family values. That should include all families. And I think that's the sort of messaging that we need to be able to take and update what the Conservative Party has talked about. Because the way we're talking about it right now, and I think the reason for it, the reason we haven't had that connection in Atlantic Canada and GTA and some other places, is that something that Brian was talking about earlier, the way that social media has become so important. And organized groups on the extremes, and I know the Liberals and the NDP are subjected to the same stuff from groups on their side, those folks bombard politicians and party activists every day, hundreds of messages, thousands sometimes. During the pandemic, I was getting hundreds of emails a day from groups going on about vaccines and whatever other foolishness. And there is no one pushing for centrist ideas. And so you get politicians, in some cases, we talked about Mr. O'Toole, who appeared to shift his values based on before he had this job, and then when he did have his job as opposition leader and shifted to the center. That what we need to have is a group that's in the center, making it clear that we want to have a party that, as you said earlier, is fiscally responsible, uses evidence-based approaches to decide how we're going to spend our money, and is socially liberal, and lives up to the word conservative by saying that we want to limit government power. We don't want to have governments telling people what they can do in their private lives. We want to have civic spaces where we have as few rules as possible so that we can have the engagement and the dynamism, those what the Burke called the little platoons of society where everyone works together again in church groups, community groups, all those kind of things. And that's what you have in Atlantic Canada. You still have lots of service clubs. You have lots of volunteer activity. And it's kind of old-fashioned. And that's great. That's progressive conservatives. That's what we are out there. GTA, the same thing. You've got folks coming from countries where a strong sense of community is really important. That we need, if we're going to engage those folks, to actually reach them where they live and talk about the values that they have. And those are values that line up perfectly with center-right conservatism. And that's what we're trying to push with center-right, is because we've got to start to get a voice there to push back against all these extreme groups, many of them amplifying voices from the States. I was actually talking before I came up, because I'm in Toronto now. I was talking to someone who had been a long-standing staffer, years and years of work for the Progressive Conservative Party in New Brunswick, worked as a staffer for one of the senior members of our government. And she had to quit her job because of the stress of dealing with the barrage of abuse she got from extremists, right-wing extremists, over the last year or so. She couldn't deal with it anymore. And so many of those calls were coming from groups in the United States. And when I hear folks in my party making common cause with those people, that's why we're losing. And that's why we've lost the last 3 elections to Justin Trudeau, who's doing the same thing on the left, where he responds to every single new policy challenge by listening to the voices of trade unions and groups that are pushing for a left-wing agenda and bombarding him and his colleagues with emails. We need to have parties that go back to taking their jobs seriously, of being an intermediary between the complex world of policies, and incredibly complicated in a country as complex as Canada, and the public.
Gosh, why aren't you running for leader? I think I'd vote for you.
Well, thank you for that. But all I want to do right now is to have a party where we can actually articulate what we believe and then fight for it proudly, not be ashamed of being in the middle ground where everyone else is. It's such a bizarre thing. Like, it's one of those things that you say, why are we having this conversation even? Why are we arguing about why we should have a mainstream political party that reflects the values of the mainstream?
So there was a really interesting series of articles in the Globe and Mail a year ago that talked about Aaron O'Toole being like David Cameron in the UK, and described how David Cameron took the then Conservative Party in the UK to the center, and said Aaron O'Toole was trying the same pivot, and said if he's successful, he will change the Conservative Party for a generation. But if he's unsuccessful, he'll also change the Conservative Party for a generation in the opposite direction. It'll end up being a right-wing fringe party, never been able to get a majority, always in that 35 to 41% of the popular vote, but never getting to majority. Isn't that what happened? And isn't that where Pierre Poilievre is taking the party if he's successful? And
yes, because we've shown that if people in the center look like they're being literally dishonest by campaigning one way one day and another way the next day, that's why people lose faith with centrist politics. And that's why someone I have a lot of admiration for is former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair, who was identified by most of the people in his party as being far too right-wing. Yep. But he always said, we've got to have a party that's ready to govern. And that means being honest about what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And if you don't do that, why on earth would you expect the public to react with anything other than cynicism? And it's not just cynicism about the decision you make today. You're adding to the public cynicism about our democracy and our institutions. So you're making things worse for yourself. You're undermining the system that you're part of. And that long term, you're damaging your country. And that's why I think there's got to be a return to some sort of level of radical honesty in our politics, because you've got Justin Trudeau, who's telling things that he knows aren't true, saying things he knows aren't true, because he thinks it's going to appeal to a base that might narrowly help him win some seats that he needs to hold on to his majority. And you've got the same in our party with people doing the same thing. And that has to stop. There has to be some level of honesty, because we are facing multiple crises here right now that don't care about little debates that we're having within Canadian political parties. We're facing a global economic tsunami, a war in Europe that is going to spread, a Cold War with China that is going to become hot at some point soon, unless we can make it very clear to China that the West is not ready to lose that conflict. So we've got war, economic crisis, social division inside this country as our southern neighbor enters into a period of instability that could easily end up with some form of conflict. So these crises are all rolling ahead at an incredibly accelerating speed. And we have got months, and perhaps a few years, to get them sorted out and to re-engage Canadians and say, we need to be a bulwark of a system that, again, has delivered more prosperity, greater equality, more wealth, more fairness than any other system ever. And that's the task right now. And yes, people like Cameron and others, they deserve the contempt that history will have for them, because they played with fire and they got burned. But they didn't just burn themselves and kill their own political careers. They burned their parties, and they burned the institutions that they were supposed to be sworn to defend and protect. And that's got to stop. And we've got to stop having politicians who respond to emails rather than principle.
Brian Bullock from Maxis Staffing in Ottawa. You talked about earlier about sort of the populist, the social media, the very effective communicator. In the last provincial election, the Blue Party and the New Ontario Party, in a lot of different ridings and a lot of different all candidates debate, had the largest number of organizers, attendees, participants, had the loudest, most vocal people. I was at a couple of those all candidates meetings, and I knew that they were very vocal. But they won, what, 4% of the popular vote in the end. Maxime Bernier and his party in the last two elections was very vocal, and those people, they stopped Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh from appearing at fundraising events and other events because of their threatened violence. And so they were very vocal, and they captured a lot of attention. But what did they win? 6-8% of the popular vote, something like that. Yeah. And the trucker convoy did attract a lot of attention, but it only got the support of 15%. 15% is a lot, but only 15% of the population. Aren't you worried that the Conservative Party is currently pandering to that very loud, that very vocal, that very activist extreme right wing?
I am concerned, of course. That's why I've joined the CIC, and that's why I fully support its, not just its existence, but also its continuation and the opportunity for us to have this kind of a dialogue. I am concerned about the party going too far to the right, and that's why it's important that people like myself, Dominic, and others are prepared to speak to the necessity of moving back towards the center on a number of policies, but also I think to play an advocacy role, because as you pointed out, those people that are polarizing or that are very loud, squeaky wheel gets the grease, they get to be noticed, and they tend to be at times pandered to. So it's important that those people who believe in the centrist vision of the party also have a voice and advocate on behalf of centrist positions, so that leaders or leadership candidates have an opportunity to listen and also be mindful and realize that that's where the path to victory lies.
Let's talk about Jean Charest for a second, if we could. I have been members of the Liberal Party in Quebec and the Liberal Party in British Columbia, and the provincial Liberal parties in both jurisdictions. The Liberal Party in British Columbia is really a progressive conservative party. It's not a Liberal Party, and so when Christy Clark says that she's a conservative, and anyone would criticize her premiership as a Liberal premier, and someone would say she's a conservative, they're completely wrong. It was not a small L or capital L Liberal Party. It was a BC Liberal Party. And the Quebec Liberal Party is the same. It was a merger of really Federalist Conservatives and Federalist Liberals, people that wanted Quebec to stay in Canada. So when Jean Charest is criticized about being a Liberal, not therefore eligible to run in the Conservative leadership by Pierre Poilievre and Pierre Poilievre's campaign manager, Isn't that incredibly unfair?
I think that my first recollection of Mr. Charest dates back to 1993 when he was a cabinet minister right before the Kim Campbell government fell, and he was a very inspiring man at that time, and he still is today. I remember him, frankly, also in 1995 at Place du Canada when he gave the speech with the passport in his hand 2 days before the referendum was held. And, he was Captain Canada back then. And I had this image of him. And that's over almost 30 years ago. And he's a great man. There's no question. So in terms of his liberal credentials, that's a bit of muddied waters. And as you pointed out, the liberals in Quebec are truly federalists. I mean, that's where the federalists unite versus classically against the PQ, which were the separatists, or those parties that want to separate from Canada. So when Charest went over, we all recall history is that he went over as leader of the Progressive Conservative Party with the intent of leading the Liberals in the next provincial election to try to defeat them for an upcoming referendum. He didn't win that election, but he did win the popular vote. And then he went on to win the subsequent election and then to stop a referendum in its tracks before it came. Is he a liberal? There are some aspects of his provincial policy which do line up with the Liberal Party. There's no question. So in that sense, I mean, the title can be fairly applied, but overall, I think that Mr. Charest has demonstrated that he is above all a Canadian, a federalist, and a good man.
Dominic Carty, you mentioned law and order. One of the criticisms that Jean Charest leveled against Pierre Poilievre is that because he actually actively supported the convoy, the truckers' convoy and protest and occupation, he should be disqualified from being prime minister because he doesn't stand up for law and order. Wasn't that also a little bit extreme comment?
I think if you're going to look at things that are extreme, it's people claiming that they're trying to defend our country while they break our country's laws for no good reason. There are times in countries' histories when that some form of civil disobedience can be seen as appropriate if you don't have recourse through elections or the courts. None of those are true in Canada. And I want to see leadership in our country that is supportive of enforcing all laws equally all the time. And I had people, because I strongly criticized the convoy. We had, before the main convoy hit Ottawa, we had protests in Fredericton. And I got into a bit of a battle with the Fredericton City Council, who voted unanimously to condemn me for calling out the fact that this group was allowed to protest when everyone else was being told they had to stay home. It was in the middle of one of the lockdowns. It's not reasonable to have laws that pick sides, that pick favorites based on who you might support politically. That is a path to an incredibly dangerous place. So I'm a strong law and order supporter. And we have to be consistent when we say that. And when folks came after me for some of the things I said, one of the criticisms I got saying, oh, well, where were you about that we had First Nations protests in New Brunswick about 10 years ago against shale gas? I said, I can tell you where I was. I was on the front page of the newspapers saying that they should be stopped because they broke the law and they had not used any of the recourses available for all Canadians through the courts and through an election to try and reach the policy goals they wanted. That if we don't start remembering that if we abandon law and order, we're going to start getting the same message that I hear too often from my constituents as well, that when they call the police, they can't get the cops to come because the crimes are seen as being too minor. That more and more we're treating laws as being optional on the left because people perceive them as unfair, and on the right increasingly because some protests are apparently just fine and others should be shut down immediately. I think the law should be there for everyone, full stop. And I think that one of the goals that I'm really hoping centralized conservatives can push for is a sensible approach to law and order. I'm not talking about being punitive. I support all kinds of progressive judicial and penal reforms. But the foundation has to be that once something's a law, it's enforced. And people have to see that, because if they don't, you're on a slippery slope towards people believing the laws are optional. That's what we saw in Ottawa this January, February, and that's what we're seeing with the other blockades and protests, both left and right across the country. You keep on letting that happen, that's where people will start to see politics as being not in the center, but on the fringes and on the streets. And anyone who would argue that a street-based politics is better than the current system we have, they haven't traveled much or read very much.
So it sounds to me like you agree with Jean Charest that Pierre Poilievre, Dr. Leslie Ann Lewis really, because they didn't stand up for law and order, shouldn't be eligible to become prime minister?
I think one of the great things in a democracy is people get to vote on that. But what I want center-right conservatives to be able to do is to push the fact that we have to have those conversations, because there wasn't much pushback on that from a law and order perspective, partly because the folks on the other side of the political spectrum were busy supporting their own law breaking with the blockades out west, the rail blockades that we saw gathering steam just before the pandemic hit. So we have to be consistent. If we're going to talk about science and evidence and all the things that our civilization has given as unique gifts to the world, we better damn well use them, because if we don't, they're going to fall apart. And that, again, I think would be a tragedy, not just for Canada, but the rest of the world.
Brian Bullock, I've interviewed dozens of people over the course of the last couple of months, and I'll use two direct personal anecdotes as examples. But David Crombie, former mayor of Toronto, former Conservative cabinet minister, said that his party left him, that there's no place left in the Conservative Party for people that had views like he did, and he described himself as a red Tory. I interviewed Dennis Mills, former Liberal member of Parliament, long-term activist for Jean Chrétien, who said the same thing, but about the Liberal Party, that the Liberal Party left him and there was no home left for the Liberal Party. What's happened? Is there room? Do we need a Macron to come in and create a brand new party in the center like he did in France? Will the Liberal Party ever come back to the center? Or do you think that center-right conservatives can help the Conservative Party move back to the center?
Well, this is precisely the purpose, one of the purposes of center-right conservatives, because there's no question that the Liberal Party has left the centrists within its, but the blue Liberals, they're gone. They have no place to live or to reside at this moment. And to avoid that in our own party, I think CIC can play a key role in making sure that those centrist positions are upheld, and also that we draw in a bigger tent in bringing in those blue Liberals and others that are disenfranchised or feel that they're not being represented within their former parties. I mean, imagine those people that believe in the working class guy who were strongly NDP at some time. Many of those probably feel abandoned as well. So CIC is trying to play a key role in making sure the Conservative Party occupies that center position.
And one of the things we're getting is lots of folks are joining from those blue Liberals are joining the CIC. It's been really interesting. We've had a lot of interest from people who have been, like you said, previously supporters of other parties. And I think that's because they've been pushed out of their party. There's certainly, I know folks who would like to see what have been called red Tories pushed out of the Conservative Party. My perspective, again, is that we need not just to take blue Liberals, red Tories, working class New Democrats who feel that the parties have abandoned them and their parties abandoned them in an endless pursuit of identity politics run by university professors, that what we need instead is to strengthen the Conservative Party. Because if we're going to be institutionalists who talk about reform, then we've got to walk that walk. And that means trying to build our party up. Yeah, if that party decides that it's going to go in the wrong direction, then we can have those other conversations. I've got huge admiration for Emmanuel Macron. He just saved France from having literally a fascist government, which was the consequence of the center left and center right parties failing to hold the center and people abandoning them in pursuit of what seemed like appealing margins, because folks who were appealing on the margins because the center was seen as being corrupt.
Well, some people think we need a Macron in Canada because of exactly this.
I'd like to kind of answer the second part of your question, and that is the development of a new party. And I think that, frankly, that's really something extremely difficult to accomplish. And with a long history and a brand that the Conservatives have, or the Liberals have, or the NDP, to then strike a new party that would try to assemble that centrist role, as I think you were alluding to, the mechanics behind that, the ability to fundraise, the candidates, that's a 20, 30-year process in itself. So I think it's much more effective to work within existing organizations, in this case, the Conservative Party, and to make sure that center-right conservatives and other centrists try to demonstrate that that's where the vote is, and that's how we can come to power and also bring about the change that needs to be done.
Thank you very much to Dominic Carty, MLA from Fredericton West Hanwell in New Brunswick, the Minister of Education, and Brian Bullock, the chairman of Maxis, a staffing and recruitment consulting company in Ottawa, for joining us and telling us about center-right conservatives and having a good discussion about the future of politics and the political spectrum in Canada. That's our show for today, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Good night.